So let's get right to this. This is a very fast-paced session. I'll describe what's going to be happening. Again, the Executive Next Practice Institute, by way of background, we've been around now for over 12 years. We're based at the University of California, something called the Field Applied Innovation. This is a central point where entrepreneurs, large enterprise companies come together to look and explore emerging strategies, new technology, new ways of doing things. This is number 423 forum. We've done 35 forums just since last March, since COVID hit. Our global audience is north of 85,000 participants, key decision makers, and they mostly come from the C-suite. So our premise for doing this the past 12 years and seeing these 85,000 plus C-level leaders is this. Our content is focused in looking across the entire C-suite, that is, and industry functions. So as you come into these meetings, you're going to see multiple industry sectors represented, different functions, CEO, CMO, top mobility, of course, HR, coming together to examine the content. The key premise is this: whether you are in mobility or you're a CFO, you're in a financial field, or you're HR in a different type of field like comp and benefits, doesn't matter. Your next innovation is not likely to come from within your industry. It's not going to come from your industry. Mostly breakthrough ideas actually come from outside the industry. So it's necessary to look and broaden our perspective at the ideas coming from different sectors and their implications for what we do. And that's why we deliberately mix you by industry, by function, by interest, to come up with this mix of ideas that will develop next practices. So we're delighted again to have Worldwide ERC once again, Lynn Shotwell and her team join us today. We've done this, I guess, half a dozen times or more over the years, both in the in-person sessions in New York and other locations out here in Southern California. But we're delighted to have this partnership again to really examine what's going on as we look forward to 21-22. We have assembled quite a cast this morning. Every single one of these people that are speaking this morning could carry this entire show. In fact, most of them do. They're on keynotes, they're on workshops, they're on forums. We've asked them to do the impossible, to get in a very concise few minutes each their reflections on what's going to be happening over the next 12, 18, 24 months. And so they've really worked hard to condense their content down to key bullet points for you in order to make some decisions here. I want to, of course, thank our sponsors for having make this happen. Our long-term annual sponsor, Fragment, of course, Robert Horsley and his team globally for participating and sponsoring these events. And of course, these sessions supporting sponsors, Ultra Global, many others who have stepped up like Intrepid, Miller Farm Media, SRG Advisory, our home team, Nextwork Strategy, and of course, our partnership with Forbes. Thank you all for supporting this event. Please, at the conclusion of this event, reach out to these people. They have stepped up and supported the event. Make sure you're in contact with them. You've got their contact info. You'll also get a packet with their content after this. We also appreciate our long-term alliance sponsors, folks like Furnished Quarters and AKA and Synergy, and of course our home base, UCI Beal Applied Innovation. Again, a lot of these folks have been with us for many years. Please reach out to them, start to participate with them. We're seeing this opening up of the economy. Now is the time to re-engage with all these great teams of people. Here's our agenda. Again, it moves very fast. We're looking at different perspectives. As we look at global organizations, we're looking at it from different perspectives this morning, both financial, the regulatory implications, remote work, a corporate panel on what's beyond mobility, mobility innovation itself, global employee alignment. How do we look at that differently in times of COVID and virtual workforces? We have a great corporate interview led by Susan Ginsburg on rethinking the workplace. And at the end, we're going to have time for you to collaborate in this meeting real time by coming on, if you wish, audio and video to collaborate with these speakers. We also have a bonus post session we want you to stick around with that will come after 12:30 East Coast time, after 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, about 15 minutes of what we call next practice conversations. Now, let me just tee this up very quickly. As you interact today with the speakers in the Q&A at the end, use the chat feature throughout this event, and also use Q&A throughout this event so we can get to all of your questions, both at the end of the session and in the bonus session at the end. Use your virtual hand to wave on Zoom so we know that you have a question. And then again, we'll have this collaboration at the end of the session. Okay, here's some quick definition, and I'm going to get out of the way here. Moving beyond the status quo. We've been kind of preaching this next practice mantra now, again, for 12 years. We've seen it used in other situations, and it's not next practices. The definition of next practices and what we've been doing with audiences across the globe is this. It is this innovation of strategies, policies, systems, norms, culture, your capability that are unique to your organization and represent a true value differentiation, a true increase in your value proposition to your talent, to your markets, to your customers, to your operations, to your financial situation. That's a next practice for you, not somebody else's best practice or benchmarking. It's unique to you and your business. So out of the day's session, we're going to look at this question. What content that you hear today might lead you to create your own next practice within your own organization? After this session, what can you take back to your leadership team that will help them fundamentally relook at the business, make changes that will take you through whatever the next normal is going to be? Our clients, our home team, our next work strategies, like a McKinsey company, we've been working already with teams offsite and yes, in person in many cases, to look at what it will be their strategies for 21, 22. And here's what they're telling us. And this probably may sound familiar to you. I'm going to throw this up quickly. All of them relate that they feel like they've been operating in a virtual fog for the past 12 months. So they're seeing some misalignment. They're seeing some engagement losses among their teams and customers. They're seeing a loss of focus. And sometimes the execution has not been there what they'd like. That's the virtual fog creating this. You've all seen it at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. You probably got an email from somebody you hadn't heard from in a long time that said, hey, we're still here. We hope you're okay and your family's healthy and you're doing okay in these unprecedented times. A very kind of insincere email because you hadn't heard from the people in months anyway. But that was kind of symptomatic of people panicking and saying, I've got to get to my customer again. How am I going to do it? So how do we reach back out to people in an authentic way, an engaging way that'll make sense? Here's what CEOs are telling us over the past sessions, particularly these 35 sessions over the past 12 months. Here are the three key things and opportunities global CEOs are telling us they want to see have happen. One, identify and remove bureaucratic structures, legacy structures, systems, and thinking. How can we strip away all that bureaucracy to allow people to be included, ideate, and innovate throughout across our organizations? Great book by Gary Hamel that's out on humanocracy. Humanocracy describes some of the stripping away of bureaucracy. Second, how do we leverage and better integrate technology that works for our organization, not somebody else's organization, but works for our organization? Kenneth Goodwin's going to cover some of this morning as well. How do you build a culture that's inclusive and is known for great communication? Again, that's in the general conversation these days, but it really has to happen now. It can't be a side conversation. It's got to be a part of the way we do business. All right, with that, let's tee this up. I want to bring up first Lynn Shotwell and Robert Horsley to kick us off with kind of setting the stage for how they're seeing global organizations evolve. What are the key things that are happening now? So with that, I want to bring up Lynn and Robert. Welcome. I'm going to stop sharing here. And Jason will spotlight Robert and Lynn. And again, Lynn, thank you again, Robert. Great partnership. We always look forward to this conversation with you. And with that, I'm going to let you roll with it. Thanks again.
Good morning, Scott. Thanks so much for having us. Do we have Robert in yet or not?
We do. Okay,
good.
If I had $1 for every time I'd been asked that. So, great to be with you all. I was just thinking as I hear you kind of tee everything up, Scott, that one of the great things about your conferences are that they move fast. So it's like drinking through a fire hose. And I think Lynn and I get the opportunity to kind of tee up kind of is what I've got. Am I sharing correctly or no?
Here it comes. There you go.
If you'll go to slideshow view, and
I joke often that if I had if I could capture back all the minutes that I use coming off of mute and dealing with technology on these things, I would get a year back. But what I was saying, Scott, was that I think by moving fast here, I think Lynn and I really wanted the opportunity to kind of tee up kind of what we see in the future, and what people are focused on, and not go really in the depth into the weeds. But I think your entire agenda today will kind of flush out how to do some of these things. But I hope we leave you a little bit with just how we're seeing not just mobility, but how people want to work. And I want to give you some examples of some of the things we're working on to get people to think about it. The biggest thing that I think, you said it with the CEOs, right? They want everybody to be open-minded. They want to digitize, and they want to make sure there's a highly communicative culture. I think that's right. And when I think about it, I think about the two words that come to mind for me are intentionality and effectiveness. And if we can look at everything through those lenses as we return to work in a hybrid environment, I'm very big on thinking, as we come out of the fog, when things get clearer, I think clear isn't going to look like a return. Clear is going to look like, how do we take advantage of everything that we've gone through, and what could have been, what we might have wanted. And really the one thing that we want to make sure that we're still ensuring for is that gathering, the gathering of and those connections. I don't think that's ever going to go away, but I think a lot of people are starting to think about, wow, I don't want to go back to my old life, but I don't want to do it the way I'm doing it now either. So I want to give you a few, Lynn, jump in. But these are kind of the pillars that we're thinking about at Fragment. Truthfully, in one of our offices, we were lucky enough that our lease ran out during all this, and we were able to kind of relook at the how we're going to work. And mobility, while mobility is part of it, it's really about enabling a mobile workforce to work the way they want to work. But in order to do that, you've got to put a framework together so people know what is possible and what's not possible and what you expect out of them. And that's what we've been working on. But Len, don't let me just go on. If you've got something to add here, please.
Great. No, thanks, Robert. First of all, so delighted to be here with you today. And I actually loved Scott's opening and how he talked about tearing down the bureaucracy, because I think that's so important. But at the same time, one of the things I'm really focused on, then how do you maintain that scaffolding? You have to put the scaffolding back in place, because I think this next year is going to be, in fact, the next foreseeable future is going to be just as unsettled as this past year has been. I don't think we're going to come out of the fog. I just think we're going to get better at finding our way around in the fog and figuring out where we're going. So if you heard the president speak last night, he talked about how the world is going to shift just as much in these past 10 years as it has in the next 10 years as in the past 100. And I think that's absolutely right. So, how do we look at what's ahead? How do we be, I like what you said about being intentional about tearing down the bureaucracy, but then how do we put in place that scaffolding to be effective as we go forward? And I think, if you look at the issues that are on here, I don't think everybody who's on this call has seen all the studies on the future of remote work. We've done our own, showing that 80% of CEOs or CHROs of companies with more than 10,000 employees think at least half of their jobs will be either fully or partially remote moving forward. That's huge. But I think, this is not, in the past year, we've been forced into this situation. And now we need to be very intentional about thinking about, how do we revise those jobs? How do we create the new infrastructure that's going to support the employees as well as the company's needs as we move into this new world? Robert,
can I put some meat on that? Because I think as we're starting to look at it and we're saying, okay, we're fortunate enough. We've got this office that used to be, we're having its size, because we don't think people are going to want to come to the office to work. they're going to want to come to the office to collaborate. When we did our study with our people, they're saying, "Hey, I'm really doing well here, but what I miss is that connection point."
Right.
So the framework we're giving them is in this intentionality and effectiveness. What was interesting is we went through and started defining the jobs that could be done effectively, mobily. And I'm going to stop saying remotely or, but mobily. So wherever they choose to do that, we thought, wow, you'll have to do for this job, you have to do it in the office. And the fact of the matter is there are very few jobs that have to be done in the office. It really surprised everybody. So that is kind of where we came to, is that when you go to the office, you're going to go to the office when you want to, or when you'd be more effective accomplishing something. So the office had to change. But I guess my point was, when we originally started thinking about it, everybody went back to an old paradigm, an old structure. Well, we'll have to do this at the office. We'll have to do that at the office. Well, how do we measure people then if it's not about how long they're at the office? So it changed. The whole culture has to change, right? The culture is really, we're not going to judge people on hours. We're going to judge people if they were effective. Can they be effective? So as we've defined the jobs that can be done on a more remote basis, we've evaluated, right? Is it appropriate to do this job? Can you keep private information where it's going to be? Are you breaking any immigration or tax regulation that you're not set up for? And then, is that person being, so now the job's effective, right? But is the person being effective? So that brings a whole new way to kind of look at people and what they're doing. So intentionality, I can't work at home right now. They're doing construction, or I need to get away from my kids, or whatever it is. Be intentional, go to the office, but only go unless if you think you can be more effective there. And I think that way the business will start to reap the benefits, and the people will start to reap the benefits, and you've got a good nexus there.
But I think you're right. But, if you think about it, the whole, are people being effective and are we engaging our teams? Those issues predated the pandemic. And there were lots of research showing that people were not engaged in their jobs. They were unhappy in their jobs. And there's a lot showing that as soon as as soon as this pandemic lifts, we're going to see a huge shift in people looking for new opportunities. And either that's because they want their employer to be more socially responsible, they're looking for a job that gives them more meaning, or maybe it is finding that right balance of, do you want to go into work? What's the flexibility to work remotely? And I think when we say remotely, I liked how you said mobily, but that really does bring into play some of these compliance issues that have been, they've been coming front and center this past year, but I don't think we've even begun to scratch the surface of what some of this means. So we all know that, if an employee crosses state lines, there may be business tax implications and personal tax implications, maybe immigration. But what about some of these other things? Whose employment laws are going to control if there's a dispute with that employee? What about OSHA concerns? I mean, there's so many things that I think have to still be worked out and will be worked out over time. And that's why I say I think we're going to be kind of grappling around in the dark for a long time, or in the fog on this, because, policymakers know they've got to bring things up to speed, but it's never going to happen as fast as the world's shifting.
But I think the invitation for everybody to think, in the mobility space, those key things: is it appropriate? Is it compliant? Are you being effective? Those are things mobility folks have been working on for decades, exactly. Right? That's a strong skill set. So I would say the mobility mindset, the mobile mindset, will be more pervasive throughout the entire people organization and using those skills. So I think you're right. And the companies that have tapped into the skills that mobility professionals have to help them figure out how to deal with remote work, I think are ahead of the curve on this. So I go back to the framework. You're calling it scaffolding. I call it framework. Because everybody's going to do this a little differently. I don't think, to your point, anybody's really figured it out. But I think if you look at it from those three lenses, how are you making sure that people are being intentional about what they choose, right? Yeah. Making sure that people are doing the jobs that can be done most effectively where they can be done most effectively. And by the way, tracking if they're being effective, and compliance. Those, the two lenses of intentionality and effectiveness, but obviously compliance overrides all those. So in order to do that, what kind of people, I think you're right. People are there's going to be a time for the next 3 months where people are kind of moving around all over the place, trying to, if they were unhappy. But I think the lens of where the magnet, you may lose people, but you're going to gain people if you've kind of really thought this through in your world. So somebody asked me, okay, if coming through what we've come through, what are going to be in this shift, what are going to be the main skills that people need? We want to make sure our kids have these skills, right? And I thought about it, and we've thought about this internally a lot. It's people are going to have to be better project managers, not for projects, but for themselves. They're going to need to be able to keep track of what they're doing and how they're doing it, and how and when they need to have connection points with others more than ever. And that's just going to have to be an innate skill. And they're going to have to be better communicators. Now, there's opportunity in here for digitization, right? I mean, how do you accomplish all this? I think definitely if you are open-minded about how to do it, if you digitize so it lives in the real world, right? And you force those connection points. I think these are the skills, the underlying skills.
I agree with you. And I think the project management piece is actually the easier piece, because communications, boy, that's a tough one. And it's something that's going to have to continue to evolve. So I joined my organization March 30th. I've never met most of my team in person. And communications is the one thing that as a cultural and as a team, we continue to work on, and we continue to experiment. Because what we thought was working at the beginning doesn't work a couple months later. I mean, you're constantly trying to figure out new ways to get everyone engaged and sharing the information that they need.
What we're calling when we move to our new office, we're calling it a soft launch, because we know, and it's a soft launch for about 6 to 12 months, because we know it's going to continually change on what people want to do and how they want to do it and how do we meet their needs. We're actually giving everybody backpacks and Yeti cups on day one, because we want to encourage this, you're mobile, wherever you're going to work attitude. I think the other thing that's important for our industry and to allow a lot of this to happen is to kind of standardize kind of the way we talk to each other. So the way I say it, and the way you said scaffolding, I said framework, right? I think we both know, we talk enough that we both know what we're talking about. But is there a taxonomy that should exist?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this goes back to what Scott was saying earlier about we've got to all take ideas from outside of our industry. And so, I think the one thing our industry, and we say mobility industry, we think of ourselves as an industry, but I'm not sure the rest of the world sees us that way. So, how do we get everybody to see us as an industry? Well, that's because we come together and we collaborate more. We come together and bring competitors together to solve those really tough challenges that none of us can solve on our own. And so one of those is, it's simple, it's taxonomy. But, if we're talking about, what does a long-term assignment mean? That should be the same to everybody around the world. Everybody should understand exactly what we're talking about, in the same way that, when engineers are talking and they talk about a particular piece of equipment or standards, everybody knows what that means. So we've got to come together in the mobility community and create a common taxonomy, way of talking, way of sharing information. And this goes to the fact that technology has to be our best friend. Scott mentioned it. Technology is key to everything we do going forward.
We know we need to move faster, and we've said things are going to move fast and change and but you can't do it. We spend so much time, and we heard for so long in the industry, you need to adjust to whatever somebody kind of wants. You need to listen to your client and kind of adjust to that. I think that's still right, but you could do that much more agilely if there were some of these standards, and you could do it more digitally. I think people are going to talk all day today, right, about digitization and how to use technology. Well, it's all incumbent about people being able to talk to each other. I think the other opportunity that's out there is for people to rethink gathering. right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's not going to be done every day. You're not going to necessarily fly around the world anymore just to go to something where you're going to see your friends. But what does gathering mean anymore? Does your team gather? Does your team of 25 gather somewhere every quarter? And then how are you going to do that?
Well, that goes back to what you said earlier about intentionality. So when you bring people together, because presumably you're now investing in bringing everybody into the office, whether it's local or whether it's from around the world, you have to be really intentional about what you plan to accomplish there so that you can be effective as a team. There's no need to bring people together to talk about and sit around a table to talk about all the things we can do effectively online. So then what is it that we want to do with that time? And so it's a combination of, what's that kind of hands-on work, that hands-on brainstorming. And then also, I think you have to be very intentional about creating that social time, because at the end of the day, we're all social creatures. And I think the one thing that, is the hardest thing to do virtually is still kind of that networking and that personal sharing you get and the relationships you build around the water cooler or, over a meal. And that's what we're going to have to bring people together for.
And we'll find that out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think we should go in with what success looks like, because I think it's going to completely change over time, and why people want to get together and how they do it. But I think that's an invitation to lots of the companies that are on this call and like to kind of think about that and come up with solutions, because I think that is one of the gaps. Digital, what does gathering mean? What does effectiveness look like? How do you measure it? There's all kinds of new opportunities, I think, in our space and in the HR space to fill with solutions.
And that comes back to the sharing, right? So we're all going to be experimenting, figuring out what works. So continuing to share out what we've learned, what's worked for us is going to be the way we're going to figure this out moving forward. So
now I know your ERC is trying to drive a standards conversation in the industry. Yes. to help the industry transform, but for the industry and open to the industry, right? So that can be something that everybody benefits from.
Absolutely. So the last thing here, I just want to touch on this is public policy, and I mentioned this earlier. Look, the laws and regulations we have anywhere in the world never keep up with the pace of business and the pace of change. And unfortunately, what usually drives the change is that there are some people who get caught up. They get caught up in because they're not complying with the old laws. So I think as we think about what has to happen moving forward, everyone needs to be aware of kind of what are the policies we need to change, what are the actions that companies within your industry or companies outside your industry are taking that will drive that change. And so at ERC, we're working, we like to think of it as there's global issues, but local solutions. So we're talking to public policymakers about the big issues, about immigration, tax, employment laws, privacy laws that support businesses. How those will actually be implemented on the ground is going to depend on the country or the locality. But this is something that I think no business leader can afford to ignore at this point in time, because it's going to have a tremendous impact on your business moving forward. So,
what do you think, Scott?
Again, this is a great tee up from both your perspectives. And I want, if you'll stick around, I want to have the audience chime in here in just a few minutes. But I think, again, I like the fact that you're looking beyond just this remote work scenario, that we're looking at a completely new dynamic. So again, thank you both for teeing this up so well. And I want to just switch over now to Kenneth Goodwin and have him kind of highlight some of the things you've teed up from a technology standpoint.
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Good morning, Kenneth. Can you go live and your audio video, and we'll bring you up here.
Yes. Do you want me to share, right? So
yes, please.
Okay, let's share my desktop. And
welcome Kenneth Goodwin from Genesis. Again, those of you who sent his bios ahead of time, I won't get into a lot of it, but Kenneth, of course, has been our frequent guest for us in New York and other locations, and we welcome you.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, Scott. I hope that everyone can see my talking about technology, right?
There we go.
Technology is beautiful, isn't it?
Looks good.
It looks good, right? Well, thank you very much, Scott, Lynn, and Robert. It was a great presentation that you did. It flows very nicely into digital asset management and the changes that are happening as a result of COVID-19. Just to give you a quick overview, Genesis is a digital transformation, risk management, and capital advisory market firm. The type of clients that we work with tend to be clients in the fintech, redtech, innovation technology, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and digital asset management. Which leads to the 144 Trailblazer Fund, which is a fund that we are about to launch. It's a digital venture fund. It's deploying capital via a security token offering that's really geared towards mature and seed Series A type of firms within the fintech, redtech, artificial intelligence, and blockchain enterprise space. But to be cognizant of the time that we have here, we know that COVID-19 has really brought on a huge digital transformation that has occurred within the industries, both within HR, both within mobility, all types of industries are gathering and experiencing these changes, mainly within the C-level, executive level. But the changes that occur within big data, and big data is very, very important because how data is both not only just received and captured, but how data is being used. So essentially what that is that, data is only good as the source of data. So that's very important to memorize, is that data is only good as the importance or the origin of the data. Natural language processing, which is very key in terms of how that data is being used. Specification management. Specification management goes back to the days of Deming, Droust, and Drucker. So you can think of total quality management and the automation of operations. In the older days, specs were being used on paper. So things were paper driven, but nowadays they're being automated to follow a QR code process. And that would actually touch on key pain points from our operations standpoint. But that's being applied across multiple industries, not just manufacturing, but also in the service sector. Of course, blockchain, which I would touch on a little bit later on, AI, artificial intelligence, I touch on a little bit third wave, but that also includes machine learning and deep learning. APIs, which are applications that we are very, very familiar with. It's key to have applications or APIs that integrate within systems. So as we get back to potentially going to our offices, some firms are not, but most firms are going through an opportunity to determine whether or not they want their employees to work at home. They're using more APIs to monitor their work, but most importantly, to actually help them in terms of improve their ability to work and ability to provide deliverables. Of course, cloud, which is very, very important. Cloud is the storage of a lot of that data. So here are the key areas for what's happening in digital asset management space across the board of multiple industries. Traditionally, there's been a restraint because of the high costs associated with implementation and integration. You're finding that that's actually as companies become more digitally transformed and they start to integrate more applications, those costs are actually narrowing down. There's a lot more competition in the industry in terms of providing APIs. So there's a lot more that a CTO, a chief technology officer, or a chief information officer could look at, as well as the human resources. There's a emergence of cloud-based delivery options. The fact that you have multiple choices to look at. You can look at AWS, you look at which is Amazon, you look at Microsoft, all these different options that are available. There's great opportunities with the emergence of artificial intelligence to automate the processes. That's going to be very key in terms of how firms are not only looking at data sensitivity, but most importantly, in terms of the use of the AI that employees are being used. So there's got to be a good amount of policy making from a lot of the firms as we continue to use more artificial intelligence. There are some challenges here. There's some challenges in terms of fulfilling the metadata requirements and ability to access, quick access to digitally stored assets. So as firms become more digitally transformed, those requirements are going to be changed, particularly behind privacy. But we do know what's happened occurring in the industry is that HR, for some reason, has become the largest beneficiary during out this period, and partly because of the fact that most people were working at home. The fact that now that there's a lot of digital applications that are being used, so HR is starting to use more of these tools to help to monitor, but also to reach out to employees, to staff, and also to do a lot of interviews that are being done. Media and entertainment has also taken up a large share, mainly, and I'll speak a little later on as to the areas that they're really focusing on within the blockchain, also specifically with what they call non-fungible tokens. And North America has become the largest share during this period of time. So when we look at the numbers here, the numbers are astounding. This is from 2020. This looks at Asia Pacific, but also looks at North America and also looks at South America throughout the globe. And you're finding that there's still room for growth in terms of the US. You have about 3.4 billion that's being allocated towards digital asset management and digital market. And in the US, the projected growth, it tends to be around about 6 billion and above. But what's driving that growth is attributed to the increasing digitization of content and the need to effective collaborate of corporate assets. That's really key here, trying to understand what's very important for financial institutions, for companies in general. That could be intellectual property, that could be data, and so forth. Then there's also the infusion of artificial intelligence to achieve a level of data integrity, which is also key. And more firms are starting to use AI as a tool to help the employees, but also in terms of predictability, which tends to be very important. But most importantly, what we're starting to see here is that the market growth in North America is distributed to a strong economic landscape and high digital adoption at the workplaces. So we're starting to see that here in the North America, that there's more adoption that's being done from digital applications, mainly around dApps and applications and the use of AI. And eventually we'll talk a little bit later on about blockchain. So the way to look at this is to look at this from the standpoint of data proliferation, platformization, and substitution products. And so text changes us, and so digital transformation changed us from how we use data and how we actually capture data to how platforms are being integrated, and ultimately to how our products and processes or services are being utilized. And to give you an example of an actual platform that's actually working out, there's a project called Brew-Right, and this project includes Anheuser-Busch, which is AB InBev, Reality, as well as other major firms. Bloomberg is a part of this group, as well as Microsoft. And essentially, the biggest challenge that they had was anti-bribery and anti-corruption. But however, because of COVID-19, those issues kind of they changed drastically towards more towards supply chain, because there was some challenges that was happening between ABM InBev, LVMH, which is a part of that group, as well as with Pfizer. So the data proliferation was really key in terms of sharing data between organizations and corporations. And then the platformization was important because what was needed was an infusion between blockchain technology as well as artificial intelligence. And of course, that's going to impact the actual outcome, which the ultimate goal for this particular group was to streamline on the actual, or digitize the actual supply chain system. There were some pain points that they saw along the way, but they really wanted to concentrate on particularly finding the right materials that would actually help them to complete their products. So this touches on a key area here. Blockchain applications has grown immensely by major corporations. So corporations are finding ways to incorporate blockchain in their operation systems. We know very well with e-commerce and global payments, That's being done, at least the global payment side, at least with the central digital currencies that are actually being used in the Bahamas, but also in China. But what's key here is the record keeping that's really occurring within the blockchain space. Blockchain gives an opportunity for records to be stored, but we're finding that's very important with healthcare, given that now that more people are starting to take the immunization, but most importantly, it's starting to take the vaccination and how that's being stored. We're seeing ownership, intellectual property is key. There's also some areas in terms of digital rights. I'm going to move on just because of the time here. I'm very mindful of the time. The key area that's happening between entertainment and as well as sports and media is non-fungible tokens. So the non-fungible token market has picked off immensely in the past 6 to 7 months. They've grown from anywhere from about a $1 million market to almost above, right now, we'd say about 400 million without ease. So what you're finding is that the entertainment industry is finding ways to digitize a picture or a painting or a card and finding ways to get money from that. So it's offering opportunity for a secondary source of liquidity that you didn't have before. But that's mainly in media entertainment, but there's opportunities to occur across multiple industries. So what you're finding that's really intriguing about non-fungible tokens is that it's going to go beyond just media and entertainment and may apply to manufacturing and other areas. And I leave the floor open to any questions. I want to thank Scott for the opportunity for presenting. And I leave it open for anybody for questions.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, Scott, I think you're muted.
I'm like Robert. I've been told that I'm getting old with this mute and unmute. If I had my life back with the mute and unmute. Thanks so much, Ken. Great presentation. Putting 50 pounds of things in a 1 pound bag again. But again, great tee up for all the things we've got to be considering from a technology standpoint. Let's stick around for us for the Q&A later. David Altman, let's bring you up. Anxious to hear about some quick reflections on tax. We are a couple of minutes behind, Dave, so thanks for getting us back on track here.
Thank you. I'm waiting for my, I hit shared screen, but I'm waiting for my slides to pop up.
Okay.
Not sure if everyone can see the slide.
We can't see it. Not yet.
How's that?
Nope.
Okay. My slides are up on my screen. I hit share. I'm not quite sure. I see you, Scott, and I see my slides are up, but
nope. Unfortunately, not getting them. You might. Why don't you go ahead and start off, David? Perhaps Jason, you could pull it. There we go. We can see you now. Why don't you go ahead and start off with us and talk us through it? And Jason, if you're there, perhaps you can pull it up on your end. Jason Duncan.
Yeah. Okay. I've got them up, so I'll just kind of go through them. Sorry that everyone can't see the slides. The first slide basically is referencing the dollars associated with a move hit the employee's W-2. So all you're really missing is seeing a W-2. And to just use a very simple example, if a company is moving an employee who makes roughly $100,000 a year and they spend $200,000 to move them, at the end of the year, their W-2 is going to say $300,000. And for the average employee who makes $100,000 a year, they're not used to seeing a $300,000 W-2, and most of the expenses they never see. The largest expense on any move, typically involving a home sale, is the closing costs for the old home. And those closing costs typically are paid by a relocation management company. And those closing costs they typically do not appear on the W-2. So that's a good thing. They're not on the W-2. It's saving the company a lot of taxes and gross ups. But the employee never sees those. So the company spent the money, but the employee really doesn't see that on their W-2. However, other expenses such as the van line bill, the second most expensive cost of every move is the transportation of household goods. And those dollars do hit the W-2. But once again, the average employee does not see those costs. The next biggest expense of a move is always the employee is the gross up, the taxes, because taxable income is hitting the W-2. And according to an ERC survey, roughly $100,000 for a homeowner. When that $100,000 hits the W-2, it's subject to tax. So the company does this thing called a gross up, covering the extra tax that the employee's got to pay. Once again, the employee typically doesn't see the gross up because it's just added to their W-2 in various box numbers. So the biggest point I'm trying to make with regards to this slide is the dollars associated with the move do hit the W-2. The one exception would be the relocation management company. Those dollars do not hit the W-2, hence one of the best reasons to use an RMC and not do direct reimbursement is by using a relocation management company. Those dollars, once again, do not hit the W-2. The next slide I wanted to chat about, and again, I'm just checking in, Scott, are people seeing these slides now or not?
No, David, just keep moving. Of course, this is being recorded and they'll be sent your slides afterward, but Jason is also going to see if he can pull it up for you, but just keep moving if you will. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Scott. The next slide is basically showing a copy of a stimulus check. Countless employees who have moved, who have not moved, have received stimulus checks. There's been 3 rounds. The first round, generally speaking, roughly was $1,200. The second round was roughly $600. And the most recent round was roughly $1,400. But that's per person. If you're married and have children, many people got $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, even $10,000. The stimulus money is huge, but the magic numbers to be aware of is for single people, as income starts to go over 75 to 80,000, the person doesn't get their stimulus. For married people, the magic number is between 150 and 160. If you make under $150,000, and many corporate transferees who relocate or go on assignment receive well less than $150,000, they were expecting to get that $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 stimulus check. However, because the company relocated them, they moved them and added $50,000, $100,000 of income to their W-2s, it pushed them over that 150 or 160 threshold, and they lost the ability to get that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 stimulus check. As Scott mentioned earlier, what is the next best practice? Proactive companies are today reimbursing their employees, but because they move them, they're losing, not getting that $4,000 or $5,000 stimulus checks. Those companies are reimbursing their employees for that loss. On the other hand, there are other companies that say, hey, look, you're just happy to be employed. We're happy to still being able to pay you 100%. We didn't reduce your salary. We did move you last year. So if you lost a stimulus check because of a move, we're not going to reimburse you for that. It's really up to the company. This is one of the things I love about tax. So many things are compliance-based, compliance. But on the other hand, in mobility, so much of tax is really up to a company's policy. So it's up to the company to decide, do you want to give employee extra money because they lost the stimulus check, or do you not want to give them? My message is communicate. Let your mobility population know, hey, we moved you. If you lost the stimulus amount, we will reimburse that. Or, hey, we've moved you. We're not going to reimburse you for a stimulus loss because you are fully employed. We never cut your salary, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about communication. The next slide talks about the difference in the state tax laws. And here I'm more specific on the US side, but definitely it applies internationally too to different countries. There are still in the United States 7 states that allow you to deduct your van line bill. Considering an average van line bill can be $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, if not more. And considering one of those 7 states is California, where the tax rate is well in excess of 10%, being able to deduct a $50,000 van line bill into the state of California means your employee saves $5,000 in taxes. And again, the 7 states are Arkansas, California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And again, Scott mentioned you're going to get the slides, but it's so important for companies to realize you can still deduct those van line bills and final move expenses in those 7 states. The other item mentioned on this slide that's a very important issue is so many employees who get relocated owe a lot more money at the end of the year. The common phrase is always, hey, I've done my own tax return for the last 5 or 10 years. I always get back a couple thousand, but this year the company moved me and I owe 20 or 30,000. The gross up must be wrong. Not necessarily. Many times the reason they owe so much extra money is because they got a lump sum payment or they got some sort of bonus. And most lump sum payments and bonus are only withheld at the 22% rate, while the vast majority of transferees are in the 35 to 37% bracket. So it has nothing to do with the RMC managing the move, has nothing to do with the company's gross up policy. It has to do with the law says when you get a bonus or a lump sum, it's going to be withheld at 22% versus your actual tax bracket of 35 or 37%, meaning you are going to owe, if not, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 extra dollars. Once again, the goal is communication. You've got to let your employees know we're moving you. Different withholding rules apply. You've got to communicate that. Again, the next practice is companies that are providing tax counseling, tax briefings, tax preparation services to their employees because these issues are all very, very complex. COVID-19, what was the biggest effect on relocation? There's a lot of talk about actual presence in a state versus virtual presence in a state. So many states are hungry for income. Even if you're not physically present in a state, if that state maybe is where your company is headquartered, or that state is maybe where you report into, those states want to collect state income tax from you. And of course, if you've relocated and had significant taxable dollars added to your W-2, this is a very big amount, and there is no uniform. In other words, there's not like a list of 51 states. These states don't tax you unless you're physically present. These states do tax you for virtual presence. There is no easy guide. Basically, for lack of a better word, the states are making this up kind of as they go along. My message is work with a seasoned tax professional who is very much aware of terms like nexus, aware of terms like virtual presence versus actual presence. And again, compliance for a lot of employees who haven't filed tax returns in states where they should have, they're going to be getting those letters next year or 18 months after, because most audits tend to be 12 to 18 months down the road. So again, something for companies to be aware of dealing with the COVID-19, the actual presence versus the virtual presence. The next slide we talked about is temporary assignments, a huge, huge issue. So many companies now are just having employees go on a temporary assignment. And I like what Lynn said at ERC. We should all understand what's the difference between a temporary assignment or a permanent assignment. Generally speaking, a temporary assignment is less than a year, where a short-term assignment or a long-term assignment is typically considered more than a year. But if it's under a year, if the intent is we're going to send you to work in this location for under a year, what's key to know is the expenses reimbursed typically are not taxable because the intent of the assignment is less than a year. However, the salary they earn while working in that temporary location for less than a year, that is taxable. And due to compliance requirements, you must file a tax return in both the state you're working temporarily in and also a tax return in the state that you technically still live in, vote in, have your car registered, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on the tax rate in the state where you live versus the tax rate where you work temporarily is, there may be credits available to you, but if you're using one of those popular off-the-shelf software packages, they do not help you calculate those very complicated ratios of the ratio between your state live tax versus your state temporarily work state tax. Very complicated. Once again, the next best practice, more and more companies are providing pre-move tax consults to deal with these issues. More and more companies are actually providing tax return preparation services, similar to an international move. Close to 100% of every company who sends somebody on an international assignment will pay for tax preparation because it is so complicated. When an employee has a temporary assignment and goes from one state to another, and those states have taxes, more and more companies are offering tax preparation services.
Yeah, David, this is great, but we're going to have to kind of bring this to a close. By the way, we've been able to see your past couple of slides, so this is great. So if you could just summarize, we do have to we're a bit behind now, and I'd like to move on to the panel.
Sure.
But this has been great information.
No problem, Scott. Yeah, and wrapping up, the biggest comment I could make is taxes are even more complicated today than they used to be, and companies should consider offering more tax services, or at a minimum, a pre-move tax briefing before any employee goes on either a temporary assignment or a short-term or long-term assignment. Thank you, Scott.
No, David, great information as always. Again, we'll share your slides post-event. Stick around, please. I'm sure you'll get some questions here in our post-event conversations. Let's bring up now Sylvia and her team, please, to talk about Beyond Mobility, corporate perspectives on innovation and new directions. So Sylvia, I'm going to let you roll with it here so we can get back on time. Thanks again.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're going to try to keep it on time as much as we can. Thank you all. And thank you to Melissa Meyer from MasterCard, Tanya Marionetti from Expedia, and also Yuki Watanabe. And the announcement that I was teasing about was that Yuki is representing GAP at this panel, but is currently relocated herself in the last 48 hours to Berlin, Germany, and will be taking on a new role as of next week. So we wish Yuki good luck in her new role and thank her for coming on from Germany. We're going to talk about corporate perspectives on innovation and new directions, beyond mobility. And our first discussion is cross-border country challenges. Yuki, why don't you lead us off?
Okay, so we have heard from different panelists prior to this session about various tax issues. It has existed in the past, but it has been highlighted with the pandemic. When you have employees crossing border, whether it's temporary assignment, international one-way move, or business travelers, there is always various taxes that are considered. With the pandemic, what the companies now are dealing with is, and this is where mobility professionals are brought in even more so, is from corporate tax perspective, the permanent established issues, payroll perspective, in having a payroll done correctly in every country that employees or candidates are touching, and also the individual taxes, both from corporate side and employee side. I was a perfect example. I could not move to Germany because my new company does not operate in the US, so I had to wait. In a normal circumstances, you would be onboarded in a country where you have a subsidiaries. And now with the new company, that is one of the discussions the companies are having, because we now have, with the pandemic, growing number of candidates that we want to onboard, but in a country where the new company I'm joining next week does not have a legal entity. Thank you.
That's very interesting. Tanya and Melissa, do you have anything you want to add to that? And if not, in the interest of time, we can move on to Tanya telling us about her thoughts on remote working and vaccine, the impact of the vaccine, or what you think might happen with that.
Yeah, and I'm ready to jump in, but Melissa, do you have anything you want to add to what Yuki shared?
No, I think Yuki covered it completely, as far as what we're facing right now with that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. I would say the one interesting thing I think we'll see, and it may take some time, but I know when Lynn and Robert were talking, they were talking about, I think it was Lynn saying that policy hasn't caught up where things are at. And I do think that more countries will get more savvy in connecting some of the immigration and tax data, where today they don't have all that information. It's in disparate systems. So just a side comment. But so on the remote working and vaccines, again, Robert and Lynn did a great high level job. What I'd love to do is just maybe share a little bit more from kind of an HR perspective and some of the things that we're doing as well. Hopefully it'll give everybody on the call some ideas about things maybe they're already doing or to think about a little differently. But I keep calling this whole remote working, like for a long time, companies have been talking about this shift to, being more remote and what will that look like? I call it this great human experiment. Like we were all thrown into this. And the great thing is we proved that we can be productive, like we can do this. And there's a lot of positives. There's so much more flexibility. I know so many people, myself included, I've gotten to spend more time with family, and that's been a blessing in itself. From a sustainability perspective, which if anyone knows me is really important, like this has been so great for the environment too, and that's important to a lot of our employees. On the flip side, when we talk about well-being, there's been, burnout, people have lost this sense of connection, like Lynn said, and that, that in-person, that water cooler talk. So there's a lot of pros and cons in what this looks like. The other thing is a lot of companies were really early to come out and say, like, this is going to be our position. We haven't done that yet because we've really been taking the time to, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know who's on, but hopefully you guys can hear me okay. But we've really been taking the time to listen to employees and learn from other companies about what's going to work. And like Robert said, you can come out with a position, but I think that's going to iterate and change. And the things that I'm most excited about is regardless of if you do a all remote, a remote first, I like to call it remote first, office first, or some kind of hybrid model, the thing we are going to see is a more distributed workforce. And that's really exciting to me as a female. The pandemic has really impacted women in the workforce, and the new flexibility that's going to be created is going to help engage female workers and give them more opportunities to excel. The other thing that's really important, I think, to everyone here is inclusion and diversity. And what I'm excited about is that, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is as we look at our location strategy as a company, like where do we operate in and how do we create that? So mobility, we've talked for a long time as mobility professionals about not just moving the talent to the role, but moving the role to the talent. And I think this is a great opportunity for companies to reflect, like, where are those talent hubs of people and how do you create that opportunity? So a few things to consider. And then when it comes to the vaccine, I think that the vaccine is really important for us to kind of get back to whatever that looks like. Robert used the word gathering. We talked about the workplace being somewhere where people come and collaborate. I think vaccines will help with that, to help people feel comfortable that they're able to do that. But I think it's really another thing. It's been all over the news, like, will companies require vaccines? And most companies I know aren't. But what we're doing, and what we're really doing is we're trying to educate employees because there's so much misinformation out there. I think it's really important that they have information so they can make an informed decision. And then we're making sure that we're giving employees time off, like time off in addition to, like, we don't want you to worry about your time off or not having time off, or so if you need time off to do that, I just think that that's so important. And so I think the future, the new world of work, the future of work, it's going to look different. And I do think vaccines will enable it. And I see a lot of real positives coming out of it, but I think we also don't want to overlook some of the challenges around well-being, et cetera, and different programs that people can put into place. And I'd love Yuki and Melissa. I know obviously everybody's been very involved from a mobility perspective. So if you have other thoughts on what your company's been doing, I'd love you to add in.
Well, yeah, at our company, we're not requiring vaccines either, but we are educating and helping people figure out where to go to get them. But from your perspective of what you said, as far as giving people time off, we've instituted right at the beginning of the pandemic at MasterCard a 10-day COVID policy. So if you need time off to care for yourself or family members, or to go get the vaccine, or recovering from the vaccine in some cases, you have that time. So I think that was something we put out right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that's really made a huge difference for our employees.
That's amazing. And I just keep calling out too, I think sometimes we can be ethnocentric and we talk about, vaccines are in very different places all around the world. Office reopenings are in very different places. And a lot of times oftentimes I feel like we talk about our headquarters, but, I had colleagues that were in the office in London this week, which was great to see them. And some of our Asia offices have been open for a while. While of course in India, just because of the situation, we've been really trying to accommodate employee situations there. So I just we talk about vaccines and we talk about the new world of work, but the whole world is in a different place and most of us are part of global organizations. And I just think it's important to recognize that too.
Yuki, have you found anything happening with your experience arriving in Berlin with regard to that?
It's certainly an eye-opening because things are very different here. The masks are not required on the street. So I'm in a little bit of an adjustment stage because I'm used to keeping distance and having masks on. So, but again, I have a really quick addition to what Tanya said. In whatever the vaccines or remote work environment, the diversity and inclusion, not from a ethnic or age or gender standpoint, is difference in working style, whether you want to get a vaccine, whether you want to work remote, that's all. The diversity and inclusion has to be all a part of that decision because, we're kind of focused on US headquarters, but I'm moving to a Germany, Berlin-based headquarters, and the company itself is very diverse. But when you're working with a German payroll group or a very different, very congregated nationality or culture, it's remote doesn't work. I'm trying to establish a relationship in a different culture, very challenging.
Thank you so much. And Melissa, we wanted you to sort of lead off on where you envision mobility's future in the workplace and how do you ensure that mobility stays vibrant?
Yeah, so vibrant is a good word. Relevant is sort of where I was going with it too as well. But it's been an interesting year for everyone. I mean, no matter where you are in this industry, you've felt this. You've had to pivot. You've had to change how you do things. You've had to see things from a different perspective. And I think, we're relevant. We're still the experts on immigration and taxation. We're still being asked to advise on these remote work arrangements, which is a very new thing for us, these shorter term situations and many more different locations than we're used to sending people to because, someone can up and go anywhere in the world and we have to figure out what it's like to get them there and keep them there. And if there are any tax issues there. So I think we're still being seen as advisors, at least in the roles that we all play on this panel. And I also think that, in our case, at MasterCard, our remote policy has evolved as things have happened, and we really have the attention of our chief people officer on this and other leadership at the company. It's really being taken very seriously, and we're being looked at as the front line of expertise to help bring this into our company. And although we're not developing, a future of work, that's really being done by other areas, but we are being very heavily involved with our expertise. So it's good to know that our expertise is extremely relevant and needed right now. And things are going to get back to normal. I know many companies are announcing their return to work. Our company is announcing it next week. I don't know the exact plan, but I do believe it'll be a lot earlier than, people are expecting. And we have been trying to manage those expectations and say, come back to your home location. But I think we're also going to see things opening up with people moving. I know at our company, we have a number of acquisitions, and you still do need to have what we call cross-pollination between an acquisition and the company that they're being acquired by. So I think we're still going to see movement. I think it's going to start to happen again. And I think what the trends are going to be, at least from my perspective, to look out for are flexibility. We're going to really need to understand that, employees have been used to doing whatever they've wanted for the last year, working from wherever they wanted, unless we've, told them that they have to come back. And we're going to see that, as a trend. We're going to have to look at individual circumstances more and, really think about how we can be more flexible and how we deliver our policies. For us, we had a lump sum policy before the pandemic started. We were about to roll out a core flex policy, which will be rolled out this year. And so we're continuing to think about that, but we're also having to look at, people are going to make personal permanent moves. People are going to make remote needs as things go on. And as, not every country is going to come back at the same time. So, and again, it's been mentioned, but technology will be a big focus in helping us get to where we need to go.
Well, I think that there's the one aspect of mobility has always been the capability of being able to pivot, to be adaptable as things change, to be available when there's a disruption and a challenge. I know we could go on for a lot longer, but I see Scott has popped in. So we were going to have a bit more of a discussion between the three specialists here, professionals, but I think we're being told that has to wait for the group discussion later on. Is that correct, Scott?
We'll get you in the bonus round, yes, in our next practice conversation. So stick around. Thanks so much. Those are
very much.
Great insights as always. Thank you. Let's move on quickly to Mary Beth for some reflections on what she's seeing from a global mobility standpoint, or global innovation, I should say. Mary Beth, let's have you pop in from Mary Beth from Altar.
Yes, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. I'm here. Can everybody see my opening slide?
We can. Thank you.
Great. I appreciate being here. And yes, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to start off today with a bit of a different approach. And I appreciate everybody humoring me for just a moment. Let me get to the next slide. There we go. So working with companies to develop mobility policies, I'm asked a lot about how to maximize flexibility, and that was part of the conversation we just heard. There's really no one right answer. Flexibility can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So if we step back and we think about how people move, walking, driving, what have you, I believe we can better understand flexibility. We know that when formal paved paths or sidewalks hinder efficient movement, people tend to venture off the path and create their own alternatives. And this is what we call a desire path. Here we go. We often see desire paths in parks or on street corners. You can see one right behind me here. They're basically shortcuts. You may even see them in cities where sidewalks aren't meeting the demands of pedestrians. So sometimes officials may choose to block desire paths. They might construct a barrier or place a sign to keep people on the paved path. And this is often done to protect something. Usually it's to protect plants and animal habitat, or it could be to protect the safety of the pedestrians themselves. So let's think of those barriers as something akin to employer duty of care. Sometimes officials may decide to pave a desire path. After all, if people prefer the route, why not give them what they want? City sidewalks have literally been poured on top of desire paths, essentially using concrete or pavement to formalize the preferences of the public. So you may not know it, a little bit of trivia. When Walt Disney created Disneyland, he didn't fence in any of the grassy areas until he saw where people actually walked. Universities as well have sometimes allowed natural patterns of foot traffic to inform the design of their own paved campus sidewalks. So let's switch now to mobility programs and talent attraction as a whole. There are many options for companies to attain flexibility within their mobility and talent attraction programs. So I still hear the term core flex a great deal. Melissa just mentioned it. It's often from companies with traditional and somewhat restrictive mobility programs. It is definitely a buzzword in the mobility industry today, but what does it actually mean? Well, in reality, core flex is just one approach to program flexibility. And today I'd like to talk about program flexibility in more broad terms. So over the past year, we've seen some industries hit harder by the COVID pandemic than others. And from my purview, I've seen some companies take advantage of this downtime when they didn't have as many employees relocating to focus on their programs and reassess whether they truly fit the organization's talent attraction, talent mobility, and talent retention goals. I've gotten very used to telling companies I consult with not to be afraid to get creative with their programs. So let's talk about benchmarking for just a second. Benchmarking isn't a necessity in the process of redesigning your talent mobility program. Benchmarking is going to tell you what other companies are doing. And if you're looking to affirm where your company stands respective of your competition, that of course can be beneficial. On the flip side, knowing what other companies are doing shouldn't necessarily dictate what your company should do. So don't be afraid to try something new and be a bit of a trailblazer. A key component in program redesign is benefit utilization. You can benchmark your program benefits all day long, but what you really need to be looking at is what benefits are actually being utilized by your mobile employees and what benefits are not, including what benefits garner the most exception requests. If you're pursuing a program redesign, especially if you're making significant changes to your program, such as increasing flexibility, adding or removing benefits, etc., understand it will likely not be a one and done situation. Every company I've worked with over the past several years to redesign their talent mobility programs has had to consistently apply tweaks here and there, and that's not a bad thing. It shows you're willing to flex and adjust to meet the ever-changing needs of your talent. And finally, to drive my point home that there are a lot of options with regards to flexibility, I've included what I like to call a flexibility spectrum at the bottom of the slide you're seeing. On the spectrum, you'll see the diversity of programs currently in place amongst companies my team and I regularly engage with. And these are just 6 examples. Our clients fall on just about every point on this spectrum with regards to program flexibility. So every day, relocating employees are forming desire paths around the policies and services that you've implemented. This is evidenced by requests for exceptions and by the noise we hear when flexibility isn't optimized. We ultimately choose to block or pave those paths. Over time, we discover parts of our programs that are dormant or undervalued. We decide when resources, or pavement, if you will, should be redirected to achieve efficient movement through our programs. So pay attention to these patterns, especially those that veer from the paths of your policies and services around your expectations and beyond your budgets. It's a great way to discover how to achieve maximum flexibility in a way that is highly customized to your unique desires, competing interests, and budget constraints. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Mary Beth, thanks so much. That was a great, fast-paced overview. And again, really a cutting-edge look at the optional paths that employers have. So thanks, and stick around, please. I'm sure we'll have questions here. Jason Duncan, let's bring you up. Jason, the issue becomes, I mentioned virtual fog. The issue becomes how to engage people in this virtual fog. And you've got a quick thing you want to share with us in terms of new technology and new systems for better engaging and aligning people globally.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So what would it be like if you could build stronger internal and external relationships faster, right? The challenge we've had, and it's going to be going forward, is how do we connect and engage remotely? And everyone talks about Zoom fatigue and getting time back for the amount of times that you're on mute when you shouldn't have been. Well, I can't help you with your Zoom mute, but I can help you communicate clearer and build engagement. And the way that's done is using video alignment. Let me show you how this works. So here are all the different things that you can align or need to be aligned across your organization. And the way this is done is with what we call the video alignment method. So taking all the steps. So this is, I'm going to show you this works with, hiring and all these other things, but here's how this works for your sales team. So it starts with, we call it the buyer's journey, right? Awareness, education, consideration, decision, retention. These are all different types of videos that can be created across that buyer's journey. The most creative of these and unique of these that we've done is a reality show. And it's amazing how that has transformed our organization and our sales because of the just transparency that type of formula for video provides. So here's that same thing, but now it's done for recruiting. And recruiting isn't as hard as it was, 14 months ago. Now it's definitely we're on the flip side. Before it was, it was a candidates market. Now there's definitely more people. Definitely it's in the recruiter's favor now, but this is still important to attract and engage the right people. We then move to alignment pages. Your website needs to be aligned. So you can see here on the left, there was this website that we helped align by giving it the proper messaging. You see on the left, it was very confusing. We helped simplify that, and it changed the organization because it attracted people who wanted to work with this organization. It attracted people who wanted to be an employee of this organization. It made the employees feel better because they now had a message they could easily pass on to their community. One of the big takeaways from this is you need to make sure that you build internal thought leaders. So your sales team, those experts that you have, they need to be creating a series of video to go out to help promote your organization. And because people are not looking to hear about your history, they're looking for you to solve problems. So by having as many thought leaders as possible within your organization, it helps move you to the top of the list of people who are solving those common problems that your solution provides. So the different levels of video, of course, we're using Zoom today, and it's a wonderful technology. The next is kind of moving up in creativity, that in the ones that you can do yourself, because what we've learned is that not every video needs to be a film, right? There's different levels, and knowing where those different levels play helps you succeed at organization. So what's called self-recorded videos, asynchronous videos, one-to-one videos, they haven't really settled on a name for these yet, but the idea is a special app. There's a company called Vidyard that makes an app. Wistia also creates one that allows you to record self videos and send those messages off via email. It's very powerful. Of course, the standard, we affectionately call them talking head, but they're often interviews to camera, and then of course, creative videos. So let me show you this real quick. The video alignment method consists of these 4 things: setting goals, building your strategy, make sure your messaging is correct, and then setting some kind of action out so that everything is aligned and working together. If you're interested, I'd love to talk to you more about how this works, and you can connect me on LinkedIn or contact us through our website.
Yeah, Jason, thanks. Again, Jason has a really systemic approach to this, and I encourage you to reach out to him because, again, people's appetite for video is extremely strong. It's a very powerful and effective way to communicate. So let's move to our closing corporate panel and interviews led by Susan Ginsburg. And we're really exciting to listen to this. Susan, we've cramped you a bit on time, but don't worry about that, because what's going to happen is we're going to hear from your interview group, and then we're going to segue right into these next practice conversations. So again, stick with us. Susan, we'll kick off with you. And then again, I'll give you a heads up when we need to get into these closing next practice conversations. Welcome.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm absolutely delighted to interview Karen Priolet at Moody's, Elena Anderson DeLay at Ease, and Andrew Walker at EY. Andrew is also the current chair of the board of directors of the Worldwide ERC. So let's get started. There are a number of comments today regarding purpose, intentionality, framework, inclusion, and we're going to dive deeper into that when we're going to focus today not on mobility, but on purpose. The pandemic has created an opportunity to rebuild and reframe in a more intentional way to create the future we all want, to lead, realign, and collaborate with purpose for a more sustainable, equitable, inclusive, and healthier future. EY's Beacon Institute defines purpose as an organization's aspirational, human-first reason for being. Marjorie Lau, who is the CEO of Lego, maintains that purpose is the most important thing we do, and it's at the foundation of everything that they at Lego do. So for my esteemed interviewees, what can organizations do to act on purpose as a business imperative? And let's start with Karen.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Susan. So people who live with purpose at work are really more productive, they're healthier, they're resilient, and they often stay longer with the organization. Their engagement is actually increased over other employees. And to help ensure that jobs do bring a sense of purpose to employees, employers really need to provide opportunities to enable employees to ask questions, share ideas, feel safe, and to really speak up. So internal organizations like we have at Moody's, where we have an employee resource group, we've now changed it to business resource group, they're really aligned with employee values, and they can help really drive those opportunities. In addition, taking time to think about the kind of benefits that you offer as an employer that align with employee purpose can really also drive that connection with the employer and the employee's value of what their purpose in life is. We recently added ESG investment options to our retirement plan in the US, and it was absolutely applauded by so many employees because it really did align with their current purpose and what they believe in and what they feel is important in the environment and in the world in general.
Great point, Karen. And I love that you said that you're looking to align Moody's purpose with the purpose of each of your employees so that they feel great about being part of the organization. Let's move on to Elena.
Thank you, Susan. I would say there's still a war for talent out there, and the organizations that really act on their purpose, like Karen mentioned, have a competitive advantage to attracting and retaining that talent and creating an ongoing and immediate sense of belonging for those employees. So when it comes from having that sense of belonging, it comes from being valued, not just for your skill set, but also for the experiences and creativity that you bring. So I want to mention Dr. Amy Edmondson. She wrote the book, The Fearless Organization. To drive home Karen's point, Dr. Edmondson did a study that 85% of the respondents said that they do not feel comfortable bringing up a concern with their boss, even when the issue is important. So when organizations have that environment of psychological safety, there is a feeling, there is a culture of open dialogue and the sharing of information. There's also a fearlessness in the organization where you are allowed to have risk and make mistakes and have errors, and it's almost embraced and uplifted as a way to have a learning opportunity. And when things are learned, there's an appreciation for doing that. So when employees feel safe, when they feel that there's a deeper sense of belonging, that's their connection to the purpose. And that it sparks innovation. It also sparks additional ideas, and it's bringing humanity back into the workplace.
Great points, Elena. Thank you. And your point about the humanity, the psychological safety allows for creativity, innovation, and risk-taking. Andrew, share your point of view.
Sure. Yeah, it's very similar to what we've heard, but I'll start with the employee perspective. And as the total reward leader at EY, one of the 4 pillars that I'm responsible for is well-being. And we put individual purpose at the center of well-being. And you can almost draw out an equation that like purpose and having purpose leads to well-being, which leads to engagement, which leads to increased profitability. And so it's, we can talk about it as this is important from a sort of softer skills standpoint, reason to come to work, but there are real commercial values to this. There's another thing that happened, and I don't know if everyone saw it, noticed it, but in August 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is a collection of nearly 200 CEOs in the US, really representing big organizations, the face of corporate America, they actually came out very publicly and they stated they were abandoning this long-held concept that companies are all about maximizing profit for their shareholders above all else. They've really redefined what the purpose of a corporation is. And they declared at that time, and I think this is really amazing, it's a massive moment in time for organizations. They declared that companies should serve not only their shareholders, so they're still important, but also deliver value to their customers, focus on their employees, invest in their employees, and then also manage their supply chain fairly. So their suppliers are recognized as extensions of their organizations and also, very importantly, supporting their communities. So if you create a whole different dynamic for your organization, you're going to drive that purpose through your organization and allow not only for people to recognize the organizational purpose, but also to fulfill their own purpose in the work. So I'm really excited about where we're going with this.
Excellent, Andrew, and thank you. And there's so many companies out there, as you mentioned, that have recognized at the CEO level, the purpose is a business strategy and a business imperative. And some examples before I move on to the next question or next interview question, Dove Soap, Warby Parker, the eyeglass company, Chobani, the yogurt company, Lego, of course, all great examples where they've embraced purpose as a business strategy. So moving on to our next question for the interviewees. As companies adapt to a changed world, employee engagement is key to retaining, developing, and nurturing talent. As one SVP at Royal DSM, a global firm focused on health and sustainable living, said, purpose is now not just a bunch of corporate guys sitting in an office trying to figure out what the new goals could be and should be. What leaders in purposeful organizations, as Andrew just mentioned, need to set the standard, role model it, and hold others accountable to it, not for it. Purpose drives change. So let's start with Andrew. What is EY doing to transform your company culture?
So Susan froze on my end. So I'll jump in. So just to say that EY has absolutely embraced this, and I'm very proud that our CEO.
Workplace.
Oh, here we go.
Of the
I don't want to, if she comes back. Well, I'll just say this. We've absolutely embraced purpose. It's a central part of our transformative leadership model. That is the framework by which we are developing our people at all levels of the organization. And the thing that I love about it too, we have training programs, not just about aligning yourself to the organizational purpose, but finding your own purpose, and programs where you can succinctly sort of state, this is why I exist, and this is what I want to pursue in my job and in my life. And so I'm just thrilled that EY recognizes that and is sort of unleashing the potential on our people with the resources.
Excellent. And your point about wellness really fits right in with what Karen was talking about earlier. Karen, share your insights with what you're doing at Moody's, please.
Yeah, so we're kind of reimagining, reinventing the workplace of the future. So our vision is really to create an organization that empowers our employees and leaders to really influence the where, when, and how employees work to get things done, and really to be able to act with more agility in service of customers and overall strategy. So we're in the process of developing some guiding principles, working on ways that we're, going to allow employees to work going down the road. And so that's really what our goal is to really be agile and to align with what employees want to do.
I like what Karen said. I also, when I work with organizations to coach the leaders with approaching DEI efforts, I encourage them to walk the walk.
Excellent, Karen. And I love your point, which really ties agility, meeting your Elena, that's a great point. And I want to just tie it back to what Karen was saying, is agility within a framework. So now over to you, Elena.
Yes. And when business leaders are focusing on DEI efforts, we know that the research is out there to establish the business case on why it's important. We have research from McKinsey to say that, organizations that are diverse in racial and ethnic categories have 35% more returns above national industry medians. We know that Deloitte has a study that over a 3-year period of time, diverse companies see 2.3 times additional cash flow compared to their peers. So why isn't there more disclosure of diversity numbers and where organizations are? I noticed that in a Fortune 500 study, only 3% of companies actually share their diversity data. So when I work with business leaders to really champion their DEI efforts, I have 5 A's that I try to share with them to be a reminder. 1, that's being accountable. You have to acknowledge with where you are. You have to be honest that you seek change and that you need help in doing it. Be audacious. Reflect that you have your own journey, similar to what Andrew mentioned. There is a level of self-reflection that goes on in the fact that you have to do your own work, but also ask for help. And there's a level of humility in that. Karen mentioned agility. So being agile You have to try new things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But that's when next being adaptive is helpful, so that you realize this work isn't just episodic. It is ongoing. It will evolve. The level of success is a moving target. And so you don't want to seek perfection. And lastly, being abundant. We're not trying to take opportunities away from individuals who may have to move things around a bit. But if you have a spirit of abundance, you understand that there's always a winning mindset that you are adding and not taking away.
Well, I love your use, Elena, of all the A's, the word starting with A. It's a great way of remembering the importance of purpose as a business imperative and an important strategy for organizations as they reframe and rebuild. Thank you. Over to you, Scott.
Well, this is a great conversation, and let's keep it going. So here's our game plan. Up until a quarter till the hour, for, again, about the next 8-10 minutes, let's take some questions from the audience. If I can have all our speakers come back on with their video, please, all our speakers. And Jason, let's monitor this for just a moment. If we have questions from the audience or reflections from the audience, Jason, if you can throw up what is our primary question here we want people to quickly consider here for the next few minutes. Okay, so based on all these great things that have been said today, starting with Lynn and Robert's opening, what reflections do you have? What implications does this content have that would lead you to create your own next practices? So let's drop the slide, Jason, and open it up to people. Again, just raise your hand or just come on with your video and audio if you're a participant in this meeting with your question. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look at our Q&A as well. And let me just start also with the panel, because you've heard each other all morning. Any reflections for you about implications for your own next practices as you look at your own organizations? What would you take back to your leadership team?
I think what I've heard again and again, even though the topics were fairly different that we all spoke about, flexibility, willingness to, change and pivot and be different, all were themes that came through with everybody. So I thought that was interesting.
And I have to say, I really liked Mary Beth's analogy that she put out there, and that I think, I've said for a long time that I think that the consumer or the I is going to drive the imperatives that we're all looking for more than and they're going to vote with their feet. And I thought that one slide where people were taking the shortcut, they were voting with their feet. And we need to be constantly listening to how they vote, giving them options that are effective, that are intentional and are compliant, but then letting them vote with their feet. So I've already told her offline, I thought it was a great analogy and a great visual, but thank you for that. I'm taking that away and going to steal it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I might have stolen it as well from a coworker.
Stealing rampant
That's
stealing.
Right. That's the best way to do it.
Flattery is the most sincere form. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yeah, and your point, your point, Mary Beth, about you talked about Disney and how he watched where people walked and then set the path. I thought was a great metaphor for what we in mobility have to do. Is again look beyond our silo, as we should all be doing, not only cooperating with each other openly, but looking beyond that. Because again, what we see, what we do, what we've learned will really help us create our business purpose and help us work more effectively, both personally and professionally.
So Chris, you're asking these guiding principles that we're talking about, how do you get started? I think it is developing that framework, that letting everybody else interpret it. So that's what we're doing, is to take a step forward, defining what intentionality means and defining what can be done effectively and where it can be done effectively, and then letting obviously letting people define that, and then letting different parts of our organization define it differently. That is the launching pad for it to go organically. When you unleash some of that power, and direct that back to the employee so they know how to do it, then they start voting with their feet. So I think that is the first step that a lot of organizations should take. And quite frankly, just imitation. I know and work with a lot of organizations that are doing just that as the launching pad to hear back from people. Because I do think we're in a fog that will lift, but it's going to be hazy for a while.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Tanya made a comment here too. She said, looking at more outliers and exceptions to identify trends and the necessity for increased flexibility. And you're so right about that. Those outliers and exceptions may come from within, outside our industry, outside mobility, outside your functional area. So that's why it's incredibly important to open the aperture or the lens that we look at the world, right? And again, this conversation is leading into a lot of that. So again, audience, you can come on video and audio. Other questions, comments, or again, I throw it back to our speakers. Other reflections now that you've heard from each other.
We had talked about future trends as we were leading up to this, and of course, our time was quite limited in terms of how much could be shared. But I would love to hear from Yuki, Tanya, Melissa, about the concept of future trends and the fact that we need to be so agile and create that adaptability. And yes, if the one path is leading in one direction, you have to learn to follow those footprints. And so I think it would be lovely to hear from you. Ladies? Melissa, you want to start?
No, I'll start. I mean, I can talk a bit about my thoughts on the future of mobility, but I do think, to your point and to what everyone's been saying today, I mean, we don't really know what the future is going to hold right now and how things are going to change. There's still many countries that you can't, get into. So we can't send employees back to where they were working previously in many cases. So I think we just really have to remain very nimble. This is going to be another transition year. And try to see with an eye towards flexibility and inclusion and everything, all the other good things that we're looking at as companies. I think this will be an interesting year, and we may come out of it in ways that we didn't even expect.
For sure. Yuki, do you want to share?
I couldn't agree more. And when you talk about agility, it's not just one time. You need to be continually agile, because when you tried something 2 months ago, it may not work today. So you just need to, it's kind of like not a hamster, but the wheel needs to be continually going.
I would just add, the other thing we talked a lot about, and Yuki and Melissa can add in some of our pre-meetings, was around the digital transformation. And I know Kenneth talked about that a little bit. But I think as we look at the agility in the future, we've all during the pandemic just used technology to a whole different extent that we have in the past. And so I think we are all envisioning that we continue that, but then, some of the API, some of the other things that we talk about, robotic process automation, all of those things like mobility, but then broader as an HR organization, we've been talking about what is that? How does that change the workforce and the talent that we need? So that would be the other one, is I think there's this big digital transformation that's happening, and the agility and the flexibility is part of it. But this has kind of changed the way in which we operate.
Yeah, and importance of our suppliers. The corporations are now more than ever are relying on our suppliers. Anything from data to carrying on the tasks that cannot be done internally.
That's great. I think all this is a great conversation. And Lynn, can I just any final reflections from your standpoint, Lynn Shotwell? Thank you again for being such a great partner on this.
Oh, thank you, Scott, for having us. It's been a delightful discussion. And, I was just reflecting back, I think, on what Tanya was saying about how Kenneth's presentation about the future, right? What's coming. I think none of us know what's coming. It's all going to move faster than we can. So that's why it's so important. I think it tied nicely to the final thoughts about how we have to continue to be agile and adaptable and constant change. The days of sitting back and just kind of doing the same thing forever are long gone. We have to be lifelong learners. And your forum here today, I think, gives us all a great opportunity to sit back and be those lifelong learners that we need to be. So thank you for bringing us together.
No, thanks again, Lynn, so much. And to all our speakers and panelists today, thank you again for your time, energy, passion, contributions. I know it can be somewhat nerve-wracking, not only in a Zoom environment, which, by the way, Zoom tells us they're having global problems today. Verizon shut down most of Southern California yesterday. So technology, right? But again, thank you so much for going through this process. And again, we'll look forward to seeing you. So my 10-second close is this. We invite you all to enjoy our next series of events. Actually, let's have all of our participants that are with us come back on video. If you're participating as an attendee, show us yourself on your video if you want to. Welcome. Again, thank you all for being here today. We're going to look forward to seeing you at the next coming events. Jason, if you let's have everybody come on and do a quick wave here. A lot of people, by the way, Zoom, again, Zoom's having some issues today. We actually had well north of 200, 300 here, plus our live stream. But let's see. Thanks again. One group wave from everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks
Jason,
all of the great speakers. It's been fabulous.
Excellent.
And we appreciate all your time. We know that some of you keep flying to another world from San Francisco. Karen, I know that you have some serious HR issues to address, and it's been difficult for you to come on board in the past. So we really appreciate you joining us this time. All of you, David, your bon mot of making taxes look like something that everybody can understand is really amazing, and we appreciate your time as well. Mary Beth, what you said was really insightful. All of you, Kenneth, your what you always tell us about digital transformation and future world is frightening, but food for thought. So Scott, thank you for putting this all together, for bringing us all together, and we really appreciate it.
no, thanks to our program team,
Great
Sylvia,
to see
Susan,
everybody.
and Jason. Thank you.